due to confidentiality on that. That's for Chief and Counsel and for ISC for their reporting purposes, okay? And then the 3 compilation engagements, we've got Sioux Valley Gaming Commission, small amount of revenue. The developments, these 2 both hold land, okay, on behalf of the community. The community doesn't hold the land because a separate entity has to hold it so it can then get converted to reserve status. Okay, so small amounts of revenue and then some property taxes basically. Okay, so getting into the consolidated statements, we're going to look at some of the numbers. All of these entities are consolidated into the band's statements, okay? So there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to manage each of these companies to make sure there's proper bookkeeping, payroll's done properly, and then there's transactions that happen between all the entities, so making sure that those are recorded on both sides. And that's a big challenge to ensure that happens, okay? So we've got all those entities, we've also got the programs. So when we look at the statements, you're going to see all of these programs, there's revenue and expenses. So education as an example, within education I think there's 12 separate programs. We're going to look at education as a whole. Council and management, they get to see those details of each of those individual programs. I think you are almost 140 schedules for your band. Okay, so that's all the different programs and how we have to account for it. There's 140 different schedules to look at. So you've got these that are broken down within the statements. At the back of the statements, there's individual schedules that break this detail down. I know in the annual report that's being prepared, there will be a summary for each of these programs. Okay, so looking at first off, I don't show it, but there is a clean opinion for the band, so an unqualified opinion. Looking at the statement of financial position, also known as a balance sheet. So March 31, 2024, these are the assets. So there was 13.1 million of cash, that's our first line. Our second line is restricted cash. So there's some money that's received that's for a specific project, for example. Okay, so capital dollars, that's recorded here. So I know there's questions about some of the gap money that's been received and set aside. That's the big chunk of that's been set aside. Okay? So we have to really track these. We work with management to ensure that those banks are reconciled. We don't reconcile them. Management does, but we have to make sure this is presented properly for each of these programs, okay? So keep these 2 numbers in mind because I'm going to talk about those when we go to your liabilities. Okay, so we got 33 million of cash. Accounts receivable, so that's money that you're owed. Okay, it could be through funding arrangements, could be rent, could be subsidies, so 2.4 million. Inventory held for sale, so that's the store's inventory, both stores. Marketable securities, there are some shares that are owned. That was through the education program for a number of years. So those are valued at that point in time at $342,000. And then there's some trust funds held by the federal government. So Ottawa trust funds that are held there, $10,000. So overall, $36,800,000 of assets. So an increase from the prior year. So looking at our liabilities now, I'm going to talk here accounts payable, that's the day-to-day operations. So that's money owed to vendors. Okay, they've supplied a good, hasn't been paid for at year end. Okay, so there's always a timing, right, between when things are paid for versus when the services are provided. Funding repayable, so some of the funding that is received if it's not spent, and I'm not saying it's not spent properly, but there might be funding for a specific project that didn't happen. Or there might be projects or given for elders in care home that maybe weren't in the home the whole year. That doesn't get adjusted until year end. So there was some money to be paid back. Deferred revenue, so this is a big liability. So this is money received by the nation for a specific purpose that hadn't been spent on that purpose at that time. Okay, so remember I told you 33 million was your total cash? So that cash needs to service that. So So you've got 23 million of deferred revenue, but you do have the 33 million in cash available. That's important. A lot of nations don't have the money available to service that obligation. Okay, and counselors talked about your risk rating. You guys have a low risk, and this is one of the things that's looked at, is you have enough cash to service this. So that's important. Long-term debt, so there is some debt, most of that CMHC. So any CMHC phase that happens, you get a mortgage on those. So that mortgage helps to build the units. You get a subsidy to repay that, but to operate the units, you have to collect the rent. Okay? And then your final item is an obligation under capital lease. This is accounting, but basically there's leases that are paid for monthly. When we do an evaluation of it, we look at it as an asset of the community and also as an obligation. So that resembles debt. So overall, liabilities went from 27 million to 32 million. That's not a bad thing. Remember, our assets went up as well. And as you can see, deferred revenue has a change there. So money came in, assets went up, liabilities went up, but you have the money. Our next line item is one of the key indicators of financial health for a community. Okay, so net financial assets. So we take the assets we saw on the prior page, less the liabilities. We hope there's a positive number. You have the positive number of 4.2 million. Okay, yes, it went down a little. We're going to look at some historical last 5 years. It's not a bad thing if it goes down in a year necessarily. Usually that means you have added new capital assets, and that's our next line. We get non-financial assets, tangible capital assets. That's your roads, your buildings, your street lights, the vehicles used by maintenance, things of that nature. Okay, so almost 52 million of assets on the books. Doesn't mean that's what they're worth. That's what they're recorded at on the books. Our next line is intangible capital assets. Okay, so there's the Grand Valley Park lease that was talked about earlier. There's a 99-year lease, so we've got that recorded on the books. Okay, so that gives you the ability to use that land. And then prepaid assets, that's going to be things that have been paid for in advance, but you haven't received the services. So overall, we got an accumulated surplus of 56.7 million. Okay, so that means your assets, so we look here, 52 million, plus the programs have been operated at a surplus over the years to give you an accumulated surplus. Lots of times this can be misinterpreted to mean we should have $56 million in the bank. It's not the case. Remember, we've got these assets here, so that's represented as a surplus. It's a lot of accounting there, so thanks for not falling asleep. Any questions at this point? Okay, and this is where I like to point out risks. You have very low risks because you have enough cash set aside to meet those obligations. Okay, and that's a good thing. So I talked about those net assets, and I just like to show, because it is interesting. I find it interesting. I'm a numbers geek, so looking at this since 2020 and what's been the trend, right? So looking at that net assets, they've continued to climb up. Yeah, small dip in 1 year, but that's not a concern. So, you know, for the visual learners, this helps to see how have we done over the last 5 years. It was at a net debt position, so that's where we had less assets than liabilities. So you were in a net debt position, but now it's positive. And I've got a few more graphs as we go along that we'll look at. Accumulated surplus, again, that follows the same trajectory, so quite a quick increase here. So programs operating as they are intended to, and enough, you know, assets being added to increase the surplus. I know this is small. I'm not going to go through each of these details.